My husband was keeping a big secret, so I pretended not to know, but eventually, he proudly confessed it himself. 9 months ago, my husband and I welcomed our first baby into the world. To celebrate our baby's homecoming, my husband's aunt gifted us a large, chunky knitted blanket. It was incredibly soft, and I couldn't stop commenting to my husband about how much I wanted a full-size version for myself. I even jokingly said I was a little jealous that our baby had such a cozy blanket. A few weeks ago, my husband suddenly snuck off to the store without telling me where he was going or why. I felt a bit suspicious but pushed it aside. That evening, out of the blue, he suggested that he'd like an hour of alone time every night after our son went to sleep. He said he didn't get enough me time and that during this hour he wanted to be undisturbed. I agreed, although I was a bit skeptical. Every night I was tempted to check in and see what he was doing, but I respected his privacy and trusted him. One night, while my husband was in his alone time, our baby started crying. I checked the baby monitor, and it turned out our son had simply lost his pacifier and was settling back to sleep. However, I noticed that part of our son's room was visible on the monitor, and in the corner I saw my husband sitting on the floor. Curious, I leaned in closer and saw a bunch of chunky yarn in front of him. Turning up the volume on the monitor, I heard a YouTube video on finger knitting. That's when it hit me. My husband had gone to the store, and his alone time was actually spent learning to knit and making me a blanket, just like the one I'd been admiring. My heart melted as I watched him work. He's a giant man, 6 feet 4 inches with big basketball player hands, and the knitting needles looked so tiny in his hands, but he was being so delicate, and I wanted to cry. I quietly returned to the living room with a huge grin on my face, feeling so happy and loved. The only problem was that my husband is terrible at keeping secrets. I knew he would spill the beans soon. As expected, a few days later, he mentioned that his alone time was spent working on a surprise for me. I acted surprised and excited, pretending to have no idea. He struggled so much to keep it a secret. A few nights later, after dinner, he couldn't hold it in any longer. He pulled the half-finished blanket out of a drawer and said, "I've been learning to knit to make a blanket for you." Although I already knew, it was still the sweetest thing ever. The blanket, about a quarter finished, was made with soft yarn in my favorite color, and it was clear how much care he'd put into it. He told me he'd hidden it in various spots, but since our house is small, it was only a matter of time before I found it. He also ran out of yarn and asked if I'd like to pick out a new color to add. I was thrilled, and we made a date out of it, grabbing lunch and then walking around the craft store where I picked out the perfect complementary color.